What's going on, everyone? So, Gale Weathers is rumored to be returning to the upcoming Scream 7, which, is expected. Is the only one that's been in every single one of them, right? So, you got to imagine that she's going to want to keep this trend, at least for now, at least until they get through, at least this era of Sydney and Gale. But the real question is, like, how are they going to approach Gale Weathers in this upcoming Scream 7? Because, one, how long from the previous Scream will this be? Because I'm trying to think of how to phrase this without it getting flagged by YouTube. Like, she was like butchered, right? Like, I mean, this was a butchery, right? Like, it was, there's no reason that she should have survived that. And yet she did. So, to me, it's like, if this is like 6 months, a year after, I mean, those injuries would be pretty severe, right? And pretty brutal. And it would probably take her a while to kind of recover from those things, right? Like, even think of 96 to Scream 2, right? There was a 2-year gap in between. And then even from Scream 2 to Scream 3 was even longer. So, right, like Dewey, it made sense. It's like, okay, you got these years in between. Right? Now, if this picks up, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, then sure, she'd be recovered, she'd be healed. But even then, like, how is she? Like, how is she just like the normal Gale Weathers? Did she get back into the swing of things? Right? Because you got to think, like, her, at her age, going through this again and going through just the attack and the brutality of it to the where she was on the brink of death, is she just going to, like, jump right back into the saddle? Probably not. And that's why I'm curious to see, like, because, okay, so this film is, again, rumors, take it all with a grain of salt, but supposedly this film is kind of again, a Sydney-focused film that kind of hones in on, Mark Kincaid, the kids, all that stuff, which I'm all for. I actually really like that idea. But there's two things that, when you're talking Gale Weathers, one is concerning, one not so much. The concerning part is that, will she even serve a purpose in this film? Right? Like Scream 6, you could have completely kept Gale Weathers out of Scream 6 and it wouldn't have mattered. Nothing Gale did in Scream 6 was of any significance. Like, don't get me wrong, her scene that led to that stabbing, like, was great. Right? It was a good scene. I love me some Gale Weathers, but like, she didn't add to the story. There was no significance to her case. She was just in it just to be in it. She was basically a glorified background character. Right? And I don't necessarily want that to continue for her character. I love Gale Weathers. I've talked about this repeatedly, that Gale Weathers has had the best story arc and the most character development out of all the characters, including Sydney. I mean, just watch her trajectory from Scream 96 to now. I mean, it's ridiculous how much she changed over the years as a character and all the story and underlining story behind her and Dewey and all that stuff. So, like, I don't want them to get to the point where Gale is just kind of this, like, quick cameo scene. She's only in it for like 3 minutes of film time, and she's just, right? Like, if you're gonna have her in it, have her in it. If you're going to have her in it, have her tell a significant story. My concern is that, like, that's going to be the case. And I felt that about Sydney in Scream 5. Again, what purpose did Sydney serve in Scream 5? I mean, we didn't even get a reaction to Dewey's death in Scream 5. Right? Like, the new creatives for this version of Scream have not done a good job with Sydney and Gale in these installments, right? Because, again, they just kind of been background characters. Like, Sydney in Scream 5. She shot through the door and said, "I was bored." That was cool. Don't get me wrong. I like that. That was a very Sydney thing. But the tracking thing, she said she learned it from the best in Gale Weathers. Right? She didn't serve any purpose. Like, there was no, like, her, taking down Ghostface and saving the day. Like, it wasn't even really something that was so crucial. It had to be Sidney Prescott. And we knew Mindy was still alive. You could have easily had Mindy show up and save the day. Right? Like, and then in Scream 6, like, again, with Gale outside of, like, what should have been her death scene, I really do. I think that they should have just killed her at that moment, because you already went through all that Like, the audience already had to endure it, and then you just let us know she's alive off screen. Like, to me, that was a little silly, but nonetheless, I digress. Right? Like, her finding the shrine room, Detective Bailey says that he was going to reveal it. He just wanted to wait for the right moment. And so even the one thing that she did was irrelevant, right? Because we would have found out about it regardless. It wasn't some secret that, like, Ghostface didn't want anyone to know about, right? It was like something that was going to be revealed. So, like, that's the concerning part. The other side of things is, like, you have a real potential to, like, what if she's living with Sydney and she's, like, in Sydney's life, right? Like, what if, like, during her recovery time? I mean, that could make a lot of sense, right? She doesn't have Dewey no more. She, all the core 4 characters or whatever, they care less about her. They don't even like her, right? Maybe they went off somewhere. She doesn't have, like, real friends or family or anything like that, right? So what if she's just like, hey, I need to recover. I need somebody that I trust that can kind of have my back and look after me. And her and Sydney are hanging out, living their best lives. And, Aunt Weathers or Aunt Gale is just living with Kincaid and living with Sydney. Or maybe she has, like, some hideaway cabin or something. Sydney has some hideaway cabin, and maybe that's where Gale is. Maybe Gale's in this hideaway cabin, right? Like, because you got to imagine Sydney has a escape plan and a safe house or something. Or she has a family now with kids and stuff. Mark Kincaid's a detective, or was a detective. We'll see what happens with him, right? Like, so you got to imagine that there's, like, a plan in place for if Ghostface shows up, because that's what she's dealt with her entire life. And I don't think she's just going to be, like, chill about it. Like, she's going to have some safety measures. So maybe it's something where, maybe Gale's in this safe house, because you got to imagine that Sydney, more likely than not, Sydney's going to be the draw for Gale rather than Gale being the draw for Sydney, right? And what I mean by that is, like, more likely than not, what's going to happen is Sydney and her family get attacked, and she reaches out to Gale, rather than Gale getting attacked and she reaches out to Sydney, and Sydney takes her family to go say, like, I don't see something like that happening. It could also be, though, like, maybe Gale is in New York. What if this takes place in New York? What if Sydney is visiting Gale, right? Took her family on a vacation to go visit Gale. But even then, it's like, even if this was a year or so removed, Ghostface just showed up, right? And went after Gale. You got to imagine that, like, she's like, would probably not make that the best course. Like, hey, Ghostface just almost killed Gale a year ago. It's been a year, right? We should be good. Let's go, right? Like, I don't really see that being the case. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out with Gale Weathers, because, one, there's so many different directions they can go, but two, what does she look like? How is she responding? How is she healing from that brutal Ghostface? Because it wasn't like she just got, cut or stabbed in the shoulder or whatever, right? Like, no, she was butchered, right? Again, like, she was roughed up pretty good. And so that's not something, even Dewey, like, you saw with the limp and all that, and, like, he had nerve damage and all this stuff. Like, you got to imagine Gale's going to have similar things. You can imagine Gale, especially at her age, she's not 23, where, it's like, it's just a stabbing, it's fine. It happened last week, we're good. You just bounce back. No, she's got to be dealing with some effects, some just, if she's just, like, normal and just, like, living her best life and everything's cool, like, it's weird, right? Like, she's got to have some kind of, and I'm not talking about, like, trauma or anything, like, 'cause, she's gone through this so many times. This is just another Tuesday, right? Like, this is a routine for Gale at this point. But, you there's got to be some kind of impact, right? And beyond the impact, you got to be able to tell a good story. You got to, I don't want to see her just, again, being another background character. I don't want to see her again just kind of being this character that's just kind of there. I want her to actually serve a purpose and have a point, and there's a reason why she's a part of this film, right? And I just think the Sydney tie-in and connection makes a lot of sense. Like, have her living with Sydney, or have her in a cabin, one of Sydney's safe houses or whatever, right? And now you have that kind of tie-in. Gale's just, recovering and trying to get herself together, and maybe she's working on a new book, right? Like that. There's just so many ways that you could kind of spin that and just make for an easy, inherent, like, here's a Gale Weathers story. Kind of my thoughts, but I don't know. I mean, obviously, I want good story, good execution, good Ghostface, regardless, right? I need good characters, character development, all that stuff, regardless. But when you're talking about Gale and Sydney, it's just like they're the two characters that are most beloved, and I don't think the current regime has done a good job with them as characters, right? And it's not their characters. Now, I am more optimistic and hopeful because Kevin Williamson is a part of this and he's actually directing it, but he's also a consultant on Scream 5, right? So it's just kind of like, how much pull does he have, I guess? But I mean, you could also argue that maybe they didn't really want Gale or Sydney to be the focus in Scream 5, right? Because you're trying to build Sam. So like now this is a different scenario altogether, right? This is just a completely different direction altogether, as like, you kind of need Sydney to be the primary, right? And Gale, you kind of lean into those two pillars and for the stability. Just kind of my thoughts. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion. I pass the question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? How do you feel? What are your thoughts? How do you think that they should approach Gale Weathers? Do you think that Sydney will bring her in, or do you think she'll bring Sydney in? Do you think that maybe they could potentially be together? Like, not together, like in a relationship wise, because obviously Sydney and Kate, I'm talking about like be together in the sense of like they're living together. Sydney's kind of helping Gale. There are things. How you feel, whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear. So let me know down in the comments below. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. Helps me a lot as we enjoy these types of videos, and I truly appreciate it. Not subscribe to the channel. What are you doing? Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one. Thank you.